Right. So for our example, let's think about a power plant near a river, right? So for this power plant, if you're doing climate risk measurement, if you're working in in this power plant and you're trying to understand what the climate risk measurement could be, so you might measure the risk of river flooding, right? Because you're okay, because you're near the river, right? So you might measure the risk of river flooding based on data from climate models or your local data providers, your government data providers. And you might find that flooding has a 10% chance of occurring every year. And if that happens, it could cost, let's say, $2 million in damages, right? This is all hypothetical, nothing is concrete, okay? Just for an example. So there's a 10% chance of occurrence of a flood every year. And if that happens, then it could cost $2 million in damages. So this is a measurement part. And when you talk about risk assessment part, so in assessment, you will ask, the plant would assess how prepared it is to handle a flood, right? So assessment, as a person who is responsible for assessment, you will ask questions like, does it have a flood barrier? And how would the flooding affect operations, right? And you might also consider whether the frequency of such floods could increase due to the climate change in your given local geography, right? And this is how you do risk assessment. So I hope the distinction between these points is clear. And I want you to take an example of a farming company. Can we go to the next slide, Pratiksha? Okay, so we are taking an example of a farming company. And I want you to respond that what would be a climate risk measurement points would be, and what would be climate risk assessment points. Please drop in chat or maybe unmute yourself and speak.
Yeah, this is the exercise we are doing, guys.
So for the assessment part, we can have like how many degrees increase in temperature will be affecting the yield or not.
Okay, yeah, good point.
So and for the this measurement part, we can actually have how many tons of yield will be impacted with for example 2-degree rise in temperature, something like that.
Right. So if I'm correct, Upinder, right? You're
Yes, right.
speaking.
Yes, right.
Great points, Upinder, actually. So when we're talking about climate risk measurement, then the farming company could measure the risk of future drought, right? By looking at climate projections. And that might show that in the next 5 years or maybe 10 years, there's a 30% chance of a severe drought. That drought could reduce your crop yields by 40%, like you mentioned, right? It could impact the changes in the climate risks can impact your crop yields, right? So let's say it may impact your crop yields by 40%. So this would be your measurement part. When you would go to assessment part, you will ask questions like about impact of such a drought on its operation. So you would ask, how would reduced water availability affect crop production, right? And could you, as a farming company, shift to a more drought-resistant crops, right? And similar questions. So people on the chat, precipitation measurement would be about crop yields. Yeah, that is all correct. Yeah, so I would just request everyone of you to just give a thought to an example of a company. This is a hypothetical company called Coastal Resorts Inc. And they want to incorporate, guide themselves about the climate related disclosures, the S21, right? So can anyone point or provide directions as to what they would include in their risks part and their opportunities part and perhaps the impact part as well? In the chat, or maybe unmute yourself or speak, whatever you may feel like.
When I got one comment, they want to know what do you want exactly?
Okay, so I want them to take this example. There is a company called Coastal resourcing, all right, they want to understand how they can guide themselves about IFRS S2, or maybe you can consider yourself a consultant, right? And this company is approaching you that how they can make disclosures related to climate related risks and opportunities in alignment with the S2 guidelines. So what would you suggest if you are on the face of it, what kind of risks, what kind of opportunities this particular company can have, what kind of impacts these risks and opportunities can have on the finances of the company?
Sea level rise, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ocean
Yeah,
acidification. So maybe marine, whatever, people who do scuba diving, they may not see the species they want to see. That could be something.
right. Absolutely right, Dharani. And Ashwin, yeah, fair points. Right, actually, coral reef. All right. So we understand that this is a resorts company, right? This is a coastal resorts company. And when we talk about climate risks, climate related risk, particularly for this particular company, then it would need to disclose the potential risks. Like Tarini mentioned and Ashwin also mentioned that rising sea levels could be a potential risk. And that could lead to flooding and damage to their properties naturally. And they might also face stricter environmental regulations. So your sea level rise is your physical risk, your right chronic physical risk. And then if we talk about transition risk, then they might also face stricter environmental regulations or need to pay higher insurance premium, right, due to increased climate risk. When I was explaining that part where so what scenarios, right? So a bank that actually monitoring that sea level is rising and my properties are at risk, then it might increase or reinsurance them, right? So that would increase the insurance premium, or the insurance companies might also increase their premium. So it could be twofolds. These would be the risks. And when we talk about opportunities, right, then coastal resorts might also identify opportunities like shifting to sustainable tourism practices, right? For example, using renewable energy or reducing water usage. That might actually attract environmentally conscious travels. And also investing in properties that are less vulnerable to climate risk might also lower their future insurance costs and improve the company's long-term value, right? And coming to the impact on access to finance part, if this resort ignores this, right, and it does not adapt to these risks, adaptation would be in the form of building flood defenses or moving to safer locations, then they might find it really hard to get loans or investments. And banks and investors could see them as high risk companies, which would lead to higher borrowing costs. So these could be the impact on access to finance. And if we talk about the time frames part, right? So in the short term, the resort might face rising insurance costs or need to spend on renovations to protect properties from climate impacts that we discussed. And in the medium term, they might need to adjust their business model, the entire business model, their operating models, supply chain, etc., to focus on sustainable tourism and target different customer bases, right? They need to identify their customer bases and they need to segment them in order to adjust their business models. And in the long term, if sea level continues to rise, they may need to relocate entirely some of their resorts or risk losing assets entirely, right? So if we talk about the importance of S1 and S2, so we understand that S1 provides you the general content guidelines related to the disclosures, sustainability related risks and opportunity disclosures, and S2 is related to your climate risk, right? So that is covered. We can move on to the next part. Right, we can move on to the next one.
So we need to read that climate related financial disclosure, which was mentioned in TNFT, and then come up with the scenarios and then understand physical and transition risk for that particular thing, or investor does it behalf of them.
No, so when we actually trying to make the disclosures, we are trying to make it really easy for investors to understand, right? So investors, they don't understand everything about climate risk, the physical risk, the nature related risk, right? They just need to understand that if I'm going to invest in this particular company, so will it provide return or not, right? And obviously there will be investors, there will be stakeholders that are climate aware, that who are sustainability aware, right? So they can do their due diligence properly. But a lot of investors, a lot of stakeholders, right, they don't have that kind of understanding. Not everyone is going to be a SCR certificate holder, right? So they don't have that kind of understanding. They just think in the terms of money, right? And they understand and calculate all those money parts by understanding the risks and opportunities. That's why I mentioned that when we talk about risks in the disclosure, it's essentially directing the investors and stakeholders towards understanding that what kind of costs could be in the near future, in the medium term, or in the long term, right? And when we talk about opportunities, then we're telling that it's not just about the risk. We're not just going to lose money, right? We're going to earn as well. And how we're going to earn is the opportunities that we're mentioning. So that is how these two things tie up. And impact part is essentially the calculation of money part. So you tell them that these are the risks, you tell them these are the opportunities, and then you tell them these are going to be the impacts, and this is the effect on your money or our money that is going to be observed in different timelines. So I hope that answers your question.
All insurance companies undertake climate risk. Like, I never heard some house collapse because of earthquake, but they got insurance. Like, I don't know how insurance and climate risk, because we don't know how much it is going to get extrapolate and then hazardous impact of it. All insurance company have that.
No, they don't necessarily have to have that, but regulations are coming up when we discuss the case study. So what we were trying to establish is that regulators are taking the cognizance of these facts, that climate risks are actually going to be a big trouble for insurance companies. And if any one of you are following the wildfires thing, right, in Australia and in California in the US, then you would have came across this news, right, that insurance companies, they are denying insurance in some regions because they understand that this is going to be there is going to be another wildfire in this particular region with, let's say, 90% of surety the very next year, right? So there is no way that it's going to be profitable to them. And when insurance companies, the actuaries who are doing these calculations, they understand that this is not going to be profitable to them. So there are two, I'm sorry, stop me if I'm digressing a lot. So there are two kind of insurance companies. So there are your local regional companies, right? And there are national companies, right? Like LIC we have in India. So essentially, if you have geographical if you don't have geographical concentration, right, you have diversity of geography. So you have companies in, let's say, US, you have companies in Asia, then your geography is diversified. You are not just insuring homes in California, you're also insuring homes in India, you're also insuring homes in Hong Kong, right? So your portfolio is diversified. But if you're a regional or national company, right, and if you are located in this California region only, then your portfolio is pretty much concentrated. You can't continue to uh, you know provide insurance to these regions which you know that are going to be affected with wildfire. How will you handle all these claims the very next year, within 1 year, right? You won't be having the liquidity for that thing. So that is the reason regulators and supervisors, they want the insurance companies to actually take into consideration all these facts. And different geographies have different issues, right? So there are geographies who have issues related to wildfires, then hurricanes, then floods, all of these things.
Got it.
Okay, any other question or can we continue?
Continue.
Right. So we were mentioning about we were just discussing the global and regional protocols and frameworks, right? So there are different protocols that are coming up, and we'll just do a brief comparison of TCFD and NGFS here. So they both want to help organizations, right? They want to help organizations manage climate-related risks in the financial sector, but they sort of have a slightly different approach and areas of focus, right? So TCFD, it has voluntary guidelines, right? It doesn't say that you need to necessarily follow these guidelines. But when we talk about NGFS, they are actually a network of central banks, all right? So they have some power to enforce all the things that they are coming up, right? Because central banks, they are the main regulators in a country. So they provide scenario analysis for central banks and supervisors. And these are the scenario analysis tools that these central banks can take to their their banks in the country and force them to actually run that. And one example of that is your Bank of England, which is actually conducting biennial stress test, right? So that is there. Then the objective of TCFD is to actually enhance transparency. Whenever companies are making disclosures which are related to your climate related risks, right? And to inform your investors and your stakeholders like we discussed. And NGFS, it focuses on integrating your climate risk management into financial systems, right? Its concern is the systemic risk. If your big banks are going to fail because of climate risk, then it's going to be a cascading effect on all the banks, right? So NGFS, it wants to sort of eliminate that risk. And the approach is that when it comes to approach, the TCFD, it focuses on the disclosures, right? And I'm sure that you must have already gone through the framework, the governance, strategy, risk management, and lastly, metrics and targets framework. Whereas NGFS, it emphasizes practical integration, right? It doesn't provide guidelines only. It asks the network to actually integrate these scenario analysis, these tools into their supervision. And there are regulators and central banks around the world who are doing the same. They are asking their banks to conduct these stress tests at a particular frequency and report the outcomes of those stress tests and scenario analysis to the investors as well as the general public as well. And impact, well, TCFD has been widely adopted, right? And it has been discontinued this January only, but so far TCFD has been sort of the central thing when it came about guidelines related to climate related financial risk.